I mean, there's multiple reasons why there is such a negative kind of stereotype around women. Part of it is, what is the source for most people on Islam or Muslims, and then of course of Muslim women. For most people, it's the daily news, and the daily news tends to focus on the negative, not just about Muslims, but about pretty much everything. And generally the stories around women are those that are sensationalized. So we don't see a lot of stories in the news about, professional women, the 4 or 5 women who have been heads of states in Muslim countries, and any kind of success stories. It's generally either in the context of war, conflict, honor killings, some kind of sensationalism. So that's part of the reason. The other reason is that often what people do see when it comes to Muslim women is not really necessarily linked to the religion, but is often linked to the culture. So everyone knows, for instance, that Muslim women in Saudi Arabia are not allowed to drive. And in fact, there's been efforts now to kind of overturn that. That has absolutely nothing to do with the religion, because there's nothing in the religious text, the Quran or the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, that would forbid a woman from driving. Obviously, there were no cars 1,400 years ago, but by analogy, one can say that women, on the contrary, were allowed to ride horses, ride camels, and so by extension, there is nothing that would forbid riding a car. But people assume that this action must somehow be linked to Islam, and that can be said as well as about honor killings or a slew of other practices that have absolutely nothing to do with the religion, that are actually prohibited by the religion, condemned by the religion, but they associate that with Islam. What does the Quran indeed say about women? There are numerous verses that actually emphasize the equality of men and women in terms of their origin. So there's verses that talk about the origin of both men and women from a common soul, from that nafs, which is the word in Arabic for soul, for their common duties and responsibilities before God. There's actually a verse in the Quran in chapter 35 that goes through 11 characteristics and duties of both men and women twice, where it gives both the feminine and the masculine for each of those duties to emphasize the exact equality of men and women in that area. And on many different levels, there are many advances that Islam actually brought to women 1,400 years ago that were not gained until recently by women in the West, such as the right to earn and own property, and that property remained a woman's even after marriage. The right to choose her spouse, which is something that is often clouded by arranged marriages, which generally means marriage under compulsion, which is actually specifically prohibited by a prophetic saying. It is a practice that is common in cultures that are Muslim, but again, it is an example of a cultural practice, not an Islamic practice. The right to divorce. Muslim women have the right to divorce, which you do not find in some religions, even till today. The right to seek an education. There's actually a prophetic saying that seeking knowledge is the duty of every Muslim, and there are numerous injunctions about seeking knowledge, and there are many examples of early Muslim women who were both scholars, teachers, jurists, on many different levels in that area. The right to take part in society, including what could be equivalent to politics for that time period, military even. You had women in the early days of Islam involved in not only nursing the wounded, but actually going out and fighting side by side with the men. So you do find all of these examples in both the Quran as well as in the Hadith, which is the prophetic sayings, as well as kind of the examples of the early Muslim women, which unfortunately, as time kind of passed, women in many societies tend to be marginalized by just the natural tendency of men who are interpreting a lot of these traditions, interpreting the texts, and increasingly women were no longer part of that kind of that effort, like many other societies. But what you have today, I think, is a mixed bag, where you do have some cultures that unfortunately are still looking at women through that lens, and other societies that have now kind of brought together both the Western belief that men and women can go out and pursue careers, can go out and get education, combined with these similar teachings in Islam. And if you look at countries like Egypt or Turkey, you find that you have very high percentages of Muslim women out there going to college, getting secondary degrees. In some cases, you have more women than men in traditionally male fields like medicine and engineering. And as I mentioned, you have also had heads of state in 4 Muslim countries, actually more than 4, but the major Muslim countries include Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Turkey. And you've also had in some smaller countries Muslim heads of states. And that is something that is not generally emphasized. And more recently, with the Arab Spring, you've had women at the forefront of some of these movements. In Egypt, Asma Mahfouz, it was very much as a response to her video blog, where she called on all Egyptians to go down and demonstrate on January 25th. And people responded to that call. In Syria, you've had people like Suhair Atassi, who was actually jailed at about the same time that the protests there began. Even in Yemen, you've had women involved at every level. And if you're watching Arabic television, you'll see interviews with these women. You'll see all-women protests. And once again, it's really underlying the fact that the stereotypical image of the Muslim woman as this, oppressed being who's kept in the kitchen, just serving her husband, is really not a reflection of reality. So it is a mixed picture. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, but definitely there's a lot of good things happening as well.